Hello, and welcome to Plastics News Radio. This episode is one of a series we recorded on location from the negotiations for a global plastics treaty in Paris. I'm Steve Tolikin, your host, and a journalist at Plastics News. We went to the talks because this treaty could have a big impact on how we manufacture plastics, how we use it, and ultimately how we deal with its pollution. Over the next 18 months, diplomats from more than 150 countries will try to reach an agreement. In Paris, I talked with both industry and environmental groups about what they want. In this episode, we hear from Anja Brandon with the environmental group Ocean Conservancy. A former U.S. Senate staffer, Anja talked about how the treaty and other international agreements are looking at chemical recycling of plastics and how countries could deal with the debate around plastic production caps. We're here with Anja Brandon, the Associate Director of Plastics Policy with the environmental group Ocean Conservancy. Anja is very active in plastics-related environmental policy, including around chemical recycling. And before joining Ocean Conservancy, she was on the staff of Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, where she helped write the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. Anja is also an environmental engineer, and we're talking here on day 2 of the Paris round of the plastics treaty negotiations, where we're among diplomats from 170 countries and more than 1,500 delegates from industry, environmental groups, civil society. So first off, just let me say thank you for joining us, Anja.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Let's start with, can you briefly introduce Ocean Conservancy and just talk about what your group's priorities are for this round of the talks?
Great question. Ocean Conservancy is a 50-year-old environmental nonprofit tackling the ocean's greatest challenges. And we know, of course, one of those is plastic pollution. And really, we like to say that we're working with you, the global you, to achieve a healthier ocean supported by a more just world. And certainly the internationally legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution, or the Plastics Treaty, is a great opportunity to do that. So we're working towards a strong, comprehensive treaty that addresses plastics across the entire life cycle. Some of our priorities within that include meaningful source reduction of plastics with a focus first and foremost on single-use plastics, really making sure that the treaty addresses ghost gear, which is lost or abandoned fishing gear at sea, addressing microplastics, both primary and secondary microplastics, ensuring that there's an upstream redesign of plastics to make sure they can be part of the circular economy, investments in that circular economy, and ensuring that none of those investments go to chemical recycling. And finally, making sure that the informal sector and waste pickers are really included throughout the negotiation process.
Okay, I know that Ocean Conservancy has been very active on the issue of chemical recycling. I guess it was about 10 days ago. Your group came out with a public statement critical of a recent United Nations report for saying that chemical recycling is a potential solution to the problem. You argue that they shouldn't do that. Can you expand on that point or talk about why you don't see chemical recycling as a solution? And how do you expect chemical recycling to play out in these talks?
Yeah, all great questions. I think our chemical recycling, as we know and think of it today, is not recycling. We are not recovering plastics in those processes, and instead we end up generating both harmful greenhouse gas emissions and harmful toxins. Where these facilities are sited tend to be co-located in low-income minority communities, so it's really perpetuating environmental injustice that these communities have already experienced and suffered. So really, as we think about moving towards a circular economy, we know that we need some amount of recycling. We cannot recycle our way out of this crisis, but we do need recycling to get off of virgin fossil fuel-based plastics. And we can only do that if we're recovering plastics, which right now chemical recycling does not give us the ability to do, which is why we don't see chemical recycling as a viable solution or really anything that should be part of this treaty.
So we're obviously only in day 2 of the second of 5 rounds of talks, so you could say it's very early. Do you have any sense of how you see the chemical recycling issue playing out in the treaty, in the language we might see, things like that? Do you have a feel for that yet?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's hard to get a sense of how things will go, especially right now when we have not gotten to the substance, hardly at all, at least this week. And I think chemical recycling is likely to be one of the major challenges and sticking points and areas of disagreement. For context, we saw chemical recycling as another sticking point, or as a sticking point in another international multilateral environmental agreement recently, the Basel Convention. So I was just in Geneva maybe 2.5 weeks ago for the Conference of Parties for the Basel Convention, and they were looking at these technical guidelines for the environmentally sound management of plastic waste, and chemical recycling came up over and over and over again as a sticking point because many, many countries in the room recognize that this is not environmentally sound management, this is not a technology that is safe or viable in their communities, and is not actually advancing us towards a circular economy. And a strong and vocal minority of countries feel very differently about that. And so this came up and essentially ended with that whole chemical recycling section being in brackets, which in UN or multilateral environmental agreement terms means we couldn't decide on this. So I think it will be a sticking point, certainly.
Okay, well, thank you for that context. Obviously, chemical recycling or advanced recycling, as some of the plastics industry refer to it. The people who advocate for that technology will say that it's needed for better handling of recycling of food-grade plastics. We're not going to be able to recycle enough of the harder to recycle plastics without that sort of technology. And in terms of getting plastics back to a condition where we can use it in medical grade or in food packaging, we need these sorts of technologies, and these technologies are developing, getting better. Do you think those arguments are missing things?
Yeah, I think the main thing that those arguments are missing is that it's, we all recognize that our recycling system today, even in a developed country like the United States, is falling short. But it's not the fault of mechanical recycling as a technology, it's the fault of what we're putting into the system. Recycling isn't broken, the plastics we're putting into the system are. So if we don't design plastics and packaging and material to be recyclable in the first place, label them such that consumers know what to do with them, and then collect them, we're never going to have a well-functioning recycling system, which is what we've seen over the last 50 years. We do not have a well-functioning recycling system. So I think a lot of folks are looking, in the industry, are looking to new technologies as a silver bullet or quick fix to a problem that is ultimately rooted in the very products that they are making. And so we need to look upstream and say, what can we do and simplify to our products to ensure that they're actually recyclable? And there's precedent for this. So California's new extended producer responsibility law, SB 54, will actually require that all single-use plastics and packaging writ large will have to be actually recyclable by 2032. So we know that companies are going to have to move this direction anyways. California is a very large market, and so we're hoping that that helps kickstart and that the treaty can help expand on that move to upstream redesign.
In a sense, well, not in a sense, a lot of plastics industry groups will say very similar things regarding redesign of products, regarding even at this point extended producer responsibility. Do you think there are some areas of common agreement where the treaty is likely to find areas that it can move ahead on, where you can have broad agreement?
That's a great question. I do think there are a few areas where I'm hopeful that we see alignment. Certain core obligations I think would be that I've seen folks align around, investing in collection and existing recycling infrastructure first and foremost, addressing issues like microplastics. Trying to think of others that been
Well, you
hearing
were
discussed.
and you were talking about design of products and things like that. So
Yeah, I think there is. I don't know if there's full alignment yet on what it means to be recyclable, and requiring all products to actually be recyclable. I'm sure that some in the industry are there, and that others might not be. But I think that is an area where we could push and really try to incorporate something like that.
okay. I want to go back to a topic of a little bit of contention here at the
Please.
Paris talks. We've seen in these first 2 days, talks have gotten off to a rocky start, and a lot of observers are suggesting that the issue of production caps on virgin plastic is a significant reason for this rocky start. So I wanted to ask you, as someone who has worked in the United States Senate, do you think that politically it's possible for the United States government to support something like that? How do you see that idea playing in the United States?
Yeah, well, first on the start of this round of negotiations, we're certainly disappointed that procedure is taking precedent over the urgency of the problem. We're all here working towards solutions to one of our greatest challenges that the planet is facing, and we do hope that countries can move forward so that we can really get to the work. To your question of production caps, source reduction, other upstream reduction upstream reduction methods in the U.S. I think there are ways that the U.S. government can go about enacting this. The executive branch has a lot of authority through their own procurement methods, through executive orders, through economic policy and subsidies for certain industries, namely the fossil fuel industry. So I do think there are methods and ways in which the executive branch can advance some of these issues. Certainly the legislative branch is a challenge when we are discussing treaties or other international agreements that need ratification. We're a few years out from that question,
Right.
but I don't. I think it's a safer bet to start thinking about how we can, push to do more with the executive branch, or work even at the subnational level to make sure that we are living up to the U.S.'s commitments, even if we cannot get full ratification through the Senate.
Okay, that's very interesting. So you're suggesting that there may be some methods that would have the same impact as a production cap, but may not actually be a production cap, if I'm hearing you right.
I don't know if I would say they would have the same impact.
Okay.
I think a true production cap or source reduction target are obviously the strongest and most effective measures. I think there are other ways that we can legislate or regulate to, try to achieve some of that same impact or effect, knowing that we will struggle to ratify something. And at the same time, we have seen a lot of appetite in the U.S. Senate for addressing plastic. So I wouldn't count us out just yet. Earlier this week, Senator Jeff Merkley and Representative Huffman sent a letter calling on the U.S. to be more ambitious in their statement. I know the first letter that they sent was signed by a couple dozen members of Congress on a similar issue. So I do know that there is some hunger and appetite in Congress for this. So I think it'll be one of those devils in the details moments.
Okay, I appreciate that context. That's really interesting nuances. And finally, just a general question. How do you think this agreement will change the plastics industry? Or maybe another way to ask that is, how do you think it will change how the market or the public consumes and uses plastic?
I think a successful version of this treaty or agreement will streamline and simplify the industry, both for businesses and for consumers. So thinking through an upstream redesign of products, of additives that are going into those products, our recycling system in terms of what we're collecting, how we're labeling that, and for consumers having a more streamlined and simplified process for what we are buying, how we can engage with our waste management systems, and how we can engage with alternative business models like reuse and refill systems, take-back systems, things like that. So I think that would be my vision for what a future looks like after a successful treaty.
Okay, well, a future vision sounds like a good place to end this podcast. Anja, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
This has been a Plastics News production. For more on the Global Plastics Treaty and other stories on plastics public policy matters, visit us at plasticsnews.com. And thanks for listening.